Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Eco Church session. A special welcome to anyone who hasn't been with us before, and of course to Rachel, who I'll introduce to you properly in a moment. As you know, up until now, in each of our sessions, we've covered a particular area of the Eco Church scheme, and so far we've looked at lifestyle and land, and also the community and global engagement. And really, as a spin-off from that engagement session, we felt that communication with our leaders and policymakers was such an important issue that we could usefully dedicate a whole evening to it. And Rachel will talk us through every angle of political engagement, I'm sure. And then Judy is going to introduce us to the concept of craftivism, which is craft and activism rolled into one. And we hope that after that we can all share and have a chat about any sort of crafty actions that we may have taken in the past, not necessarily to do with the environment, but just anything really in that area. But before I hand over to Rachel and to get us in the sort of frame of mind for campaigning, I'd just like to draw your attention to an initiative that's recently launched here in Wales called Climate Cymru. And Jason, if you could just, yeah, thank you. So Jason's just going to share this image with us. So it's rare that in these sessions we cover anything that's specific to Wales. So I will just have to ask our friends over the border to bear with us for a moment. So Climate Cymru is all about taking Wales to the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow this year in November. And it's an opportunity for the people of Wales to let their assembly members, their members of parliament and ultimately global leaders know how much they care about creating a better future for communities here in Wales and also around the world. So there are many diverse and powerful voices who have partnered with Climate Cymru, including Christian Aid Cymru, Cytun, Oxfam, the Wildlife Trust, and many more. And after the Synod meeting in March, actually, it was agreed that the Synod of Wales would also take steps to become a partner, and this will happen within the next few weeks. So all these organisations will obviously have different perspectives on what's needed from our leaders, but they all believe that the voices of people from across Wales need to be heard at COP. So I would encourage you to look at the Climate Cymru website. They've got a fantastic website with a lot of sort of interactive activities and quizzes, and it's very colourful. And it also sort of tells you a little about all the partner organisations. So it really is, it's quite a nice website to sort of look around. So please do have a look and then add your voice, and also encourage members of your congregations, the community, your friends and relatives and so on in Wales to add their voice, because they have got an aim of collecting 10,000 voices by June and then 50,000 to take to COP in November. So getting back to this evening, we're absolutely delighted that Rachel Mander from Hope for the Future can be with us here this evening. Rachel is the Faith Outreach Officer for the charity, and I think it's probably best if I just let her describe the organisation and its work herself. So I'll hand over to you now, Rachel, and you're very welcome this evening.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not sure about covering every angle of political campaigning, or however it is you set it up for me, Eileen, but I'll do my best with some of them. And yeah, so I work for Hope for the Future. Hope for the Future was set up ahead of the 2015 general election. It started as a project of some Yorkshire churches who were looking at how they could engage their MPs with climate change in an effective way. They were struggling to do that. And it's grown a lot from there. So my role there as the Faith Outreach Officer is now the only kind of faith-based role, but we have projects across schools, across councils, there's a media project officer, there's events, so lots of different areas, and what we're doing really is helping people build effective relationships with MPs. We also do that in a number of different ways, so I'm aware that I'm speaking in a Welsh context, but I'm also going to talk mostly about MPs, but that it will apply across in lots of different ways as well. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll go from there. So here we go. So these are the areas that I'm going to cover tonight, some more in brief than others. So I'll talk a little bit about political engagement as mission and why we might do that as Christians, a background to this year. I'm sure you'll already be aware about COP to some extent perhaps, but I can go into that a little bit more in detail. Then the main amount of time will be talking about how to engage politically and the approach that we have at Hope for the Future. I'll talk through some of our case studies with different MPs. Then I'll touch on opportunities for the year ahead and ways you might like to engage. And then there'll be time for questions and answers. Do feel free to put comments and questions in the chat as I'm talking. I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen, but I will get to those questions and we can pick them up in the Q&A part of the evening. So political engagement as mission. So I've heard it said that you can reduce the gospel into a sentence by saying Jesus Christ is Lord. And that brings up a big question of what is Jesus Christ Lord of? And we might say, well, maybe it's just individual people. Maybe Jesus Christ is Lord of the church. Or we might broaden that out and say Jesus Christ is Lord of creation. And if we're making that final claim, then I'd suggest that we're making a very big political claim. And in fact, if we think about Jesus' death and crucifixion, what was the cause of that? Well, actually, it was a political fallout. And so it should seem strange to us where the church is unwilling to get involved with what it terms politics and separates out the spiritual from the political in any sense. And if we also think about our call to be good neighbours, well, I think that means engaging politically, because how we live well with one another is political, because how we live well involves questions of power. And actually, all questions of power are to some extent political. So we can think about political engagement as actually part of living in the world, and living in the world is part of just living, but it's also part of mission and how we live. So that's kind of a small little backdrop to that. So thinking about this year, this is like a little graph to show where we are across the different months of this year and how that intersects with climate and environment. So we're already past February when we had the Climate Coalition's Show the Love campaign. In June, the UK hosts the G7 in Cornwall. And that's really significant because the G7 represent, I think, still over half of global net wealth. And we'll talk about COP26, but one of the major themes of that is climate finance. And so we hope that the UK would be using that opportunity in June to kind of set the foundations it needs for what could be achieved at COP26. Then between June and November, comes September, but also hopefully a building of momentum. And there are plans, they're still kind of in the planning stages for this, but the Climate Coalition are planning some sort of climate festival in September. And there are a number of other different actions that are being taken across this year. And if you want more information about that, we can talk more about it in the Q&A. And then we're building up to COP26 in November. And COP26 stands for Conference of Parties. It's 26 because it's the 26th one. And they're the UN International Climate Negotiations, or kind of like the Olympic Games of climate change, if you want another way to think about it. And this is how Chris Stark, who's the Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, the UK's government advisory body on climate change, puts it. He's said that the COP26 is a major milestone for the international effort. It's the date by which the UK must have raised its own ambition with real policies and programmes to put us on a credible path to net zero by 2050. And that's kind of a major reason to engage politically. Is actually the UK needs to be held to account to its own commitments on the climate. At the moment, the UK has made a lot of commitments, but actually we are yet to outline exactly how it is that we're going to reach net zero by 2050 or anything else along those lines as well. So that's a bit of the big picture. And I'm now going to talk more specifically about how to engage with MPs, but it can also be other local decision makers and other contexts as well. And I'm going to start by showing you a video. Now, my internet sometimes isn't great with this video, but you should be able to hear the audio even if you can't hear, even if the picture is a bit jerky. And this video is a bit of a kind of worst case scenario for an MP meeting. And I'd really like it if, as you watch it, you try and identify what it is that goes wrong in this few-minute video. Hopefully it'll work. I've just had a notification that says your internet connection is unstable. So we'll see, and we might have to give up on it. But let's have a go. Sorry, to do this, I need to reshare my screen.
Sarah, I'm so sorry I'm late. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please do take a seat. Where have you come from today?
Broomhill.
Broomhill, lovely part of town. I lived there until very recently myself. Well, let me tell you a bit about myself. Unfortunately, I haven't got a great deal of time today because I'm running late, so I'm sorry about that. But really, over the next period of time that we have together, I will just be here to listen to what you have to say, and I can't make any promises, but really to serve. That's how I see my role. It's my pleasure to serve in this community. So you just fire away, and I'll see what I can do. One thing I will say, you didn't come by car, did you? I mean, I'm actually a cyclist myself, but on the rare occasion that I do come by car, I really struggle for parking, but...
I cycled as well.
Of course you did, Sarah. Well, yeah, you just go ahead.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So I was recently in Peru and...
what an amazing part of the world. How long were you there for?
2 months.
2 months, amazing. And what was it you doing? Just travelling? Or?
I was doing some volunteer work.
Very admirable, Sarah. I've always wanted to go. I've never actually found the time. Was it in the capital that you were?
In Lima,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
very jealous, But anyway, believe I'm interrupting you. Do go on.
So anyway, while I was out there, I noticed the devastating effects that climate change is having on the country and the people there.
But of course, we're respond to the point that you're making there. We're so fortunate, I mean, a country like this that we don't have to worry about that sort of thing. But I'm sure over there it must be very concerning, and the issue certainly has my sympathy.
It is very worrying. But anyway, so, you know, I've noticed some of the damaging policy changes that the government's making to do with climate change, and I just wanted to come and talk to you and see what
I think the government's been absolutely outstanding on climate change, and we had that agreement in Paris a couple of years ago. It was every country in the world coming together and saying, we're going to do something about this, and to limit global warming, I believe it was to two degrees, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, Sarah, Britain was at the forefront of that.
But even with the Paris Agreement, we're still going to see some really damaging effects of climate change. And, you know, we're not even on track to meet those targets anyway. And well, you're my MP. You're supposed to represent me. What are you doing about it?
Well, I mean, I'll level with you, Sarah. I think, you know, it's really important that when you come to things like this, you bring correct information and factual information. But you know, what I'd like to say to you is, when I leave a room, I switch the light bulb off. I've already told you I'm a keen cyclist. I've just found this fantastic new washing up liquid. It's called E-Couver. I'd highly recommend it to you. And what I'm really trying to say to you, just to respond to this point, is, you know, I'm doing things about this issue. I'm sure you are too. And I'm not saying this is you, Sarah, but people come in here and say, why isn't the government doing this? Why isn't the government doing that? And of course, everyone has their pet issue, don't they? The NHS, climate change, whatever it is. And actually the government's doing our bit, and it's really important that you are also doing your bit, that the public is doing their bit. So that would be
people are dying.
Yeah.
So what did we see in the clip and what did we think?
It reminded me of a meeting that I had with Eric Pickles, the MP.
What about it reminded you of that, Jason?
Oh, just particularly at the end there, but it was the thing where you just really couldn't get your point out. The difference being he was very aggressive, but also he kept saying, and this was to a group of church people, he kept saying, but what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And so we just couldn't really engage with him.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that MP didn't listen at all. I mean, she was a typical politician. She just barged on, talked and talked and talked. But perhaps the young girl maybe could have been slightly better prepared, although obviously she wasn't expecting the MP just to talk like that. But, I mean, perhaps she could have had a few more clear points, concise points or facts just to throw at her. Maybe that's just a suggestion. Then she might have been able to tackle her a bit more easily.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to raise. It's not just the MP in this video that derails things. There are things on both sides. So we've already had, Jason was kind of talking, I guess, a bit about being talked over or having quite a confrontational conversation. And Alison, you've mentioned maybe not like directing or steering a conversation well, or being prepared, that having like thought about where the conversation is going to go and then how you're going to steer it. What else did we see in that video?
I was wondering the degree to which the person had actually done research on what the MP's agenda was. I think that if it is possible to and it is possible to build a relationship with the MP before you download an issue as important to this, it actually helps. And even on a subject just like this on its own, they've always got something that they've said in public that you can applaud rather than drive them onto the defensive straight away. And then sort of find ways that you can start to offer how you can help and lead it in a more positive direction than a confrontational one like that developed into.
Yeah. Eileen?
Yeah, I was going to say if she'd actually sort of followed up immediately on the fact that the MP had arrived on a bike, and maybe she could have led it down that track quite quickly.
Yeah. Judith, did you want to speak?
I was just amazed that she was so rude, and I noticed that she was reading her phone. And I think I would have challenged her at that. Never mind what's on the agenda. Excuse me, why is your mobile phone, more important in this conversation face to face? And been quite, not rude, but as abrupt and as questioning as she had been to ignore all my earlier points. I think
perhaps the girl should have had the main points on a piece of paper to actually give them to the MP. Not the whole, the whole main point, so that MP could take them away.
I think what she got was something.
She wasn't listening to her, was she?
She wasn't. But I think she got a whole lot of things she wanted to say, but everything was there in far too many words, and she wasn't sufficiently able to break it down to bullet points.
Ian, did you want to say something?
No, it's me. I think I'd have been a bit derailed when she came in and said, well, I haven't got much time.
Yeah.
I think I'd have been, what's the most important thing that I've got to get across to her? And I think that would have derailed me a little bit.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense. Yeah, so there are lots of things in that video which are far from an ideal. And we've mentioned quite a few of them. So we've had, there's interruption, there's distraction of the phone, there's the pressure of an MP coming in, being like, oh, I'm here for like a second, but I'm sort of elsewhere. And the way that she kind of talks down the constituent and says, oh, just to pick up on what you've just said. But actually it's not really doing that. It's just kind of taking the conversation away from what the constituent is talking about. And then on the constituent side, you have, she starts with Peru, Now, presumably the MP isn't the MP for Peru, and therefore she's kind of picked up on something that actually in the MP's mind, they'll be like, oh, that's not here, that's not what I do, this isn't relevant to me. You also saw the constituent express her own irritation. And right at the end, it ends on the constituent being like, but people are dying. And so you can see the way that there's kind of an escalation of frustration on both sides to an extent. And so the things that I'm going to talk through in the time that I have tonight is actually the approach we take in terms of how do you have political engagement that engages constructively, especially when you're thrown into these circumstances where actually it's not necessarily going to be always set up nicely for you. And can you have positive political engagement? And our answer at Hope for Future is yes, but we understand why people can be quite suspicious of that answer. So we'll walk you through that now, and I'll start sharing my screen again. So this is the approach that we take, and it's a relationship-based approach. It starts with research, finding out where your MP or local decision maker is at about something. You find common ground. You define a SMART agenda, which is to say you go in with a clear action point that you want your MP to take, and then you prepare for your conversation. And what we say is, actually, you've got to be realistic about whoever it is that you're meeting. You're not going to completely transform the way they see the entire world in a 20, 30, 40-minute meeting. But what you are going to do is hopefully move them one or two places along this kind of sliding scale from where they started to where you're hoping that they're going to end up. And so that can help as well, because I think sometimes we can have unrealistic expectations of what we can do in a meeting. And if we have unrealistic expectations, then you come out disappointed and you don't engage any further. So it's understanding that actually this is quite a long-term process, engaging well politically. And that is hard work, we completely acknowledge that. But also that is what Hope for the Future is there to help facilitate. So I'll just talk you through some of our case studies for how we've engaged well with MPs previously, because I think it illustrates the principles better than just saying them. So this is Alex Chalk MP, he's Conservative MP for Cheltenham. And constituents first approached us and said, he just sticks with the government line. We can't engage him well on this. How do we do this? They had an initial meeting, which went well. And he did follow up with the ask that they had presented. Following that, they asked for him to attend a school workshop. So he went into a sixth form, and the sixth formers presented different climate campaigns to him. Then we had a local panel event on solar energy. And this represented something of a breakthrough, actually, because this was the first time that had said, oh, the government could go further here. Actually, there is more to do. And actually, this has resulted with, it was Alex, who was one of the MPs who proposed the net zero legislation that then got passed in June 2019. So it's a really good template or model of this actually in action. And you can see what Alex himself said. So he talked about being able to engage with MPs being essential for healthy democracy. And he uses this phrase, the existential of climate change. And back when we had met Alex, that would not be a phrase that he would have used in regards to this topic. And you can see he nicely gives us a bit of a shout out for our work and engagement with him. This case study isn't actually one from us, but it's very insightful. It's an MP talking about meeting climate campaigners. It's Gary Streeter MP, he's a Conservative MP in Devon. And he said, I tried to analyse why the 30-minute meeting had such an impact on me. First, it was not the usual suspects, not a sandal or shaggy beard in sight. These were professional, balanced people, and their passion came through everything they said. They genuinely believed we were running out of time, and their commitment was impressive. It's simply one of those moments, both message and messenger in perfect alignment. Now, we might want to dispute what he says about the usual suspects, and yet it's very interesting because it tells us something about the perception that's held by this MP. And actually MPs will have sat through a lot of really bad meetings where people have been angry with them or emotional or upset or been attacking them, and MPs have been backed into a corner a little bit. And actually Mark said something in the discussion about getting to the point where things are defensive. And that's exactly what you want to avoid if you're having a political engagement, is you want to frame the conversation that you're having in a collaborative way where everyone feels at ease and able to engage. And so that's the work we do, is bringing the message and messenger into alignment. I might skip a couple of these just because of time, but the same principles apply. Yeah, and we've moved on to Zoom recently as well, and actually people have been having really successful political engagement via Zoom, and actually that does save on travel, which is a nice bonus. But always in what we're doing, it's making it personal and making it local. And we hear this from when we talk to MPs themselves about what they like and what works for them in terms of being able to help constituents. And it's the same themes over again, is actually this group, or whoever it is that I'm meeting, have they thought through what they're presenting with me, and are they making it clear what they want me to do as a result? And I think it's easy for something like climate change especially to be like, what are you doing, and how, like, why aren't you doing enough? But actually asking such a big question is paralysing and isn't going to move things forward. Yeah, so we'll move and look at some of these individual parts of the relationship-based approach. And we'll start with research. And research is important because of this quote, which says, designing a presentation without your audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. And so what you're doing at the research stage is finding out who you're going to talk to. And I think this was mentioned in the discussion. Yes, there are lots of different ways that you can find out about your MP. One of the main websites is Hansard. We spend a lot of our time at Hope for the Future on Hansard. And it's a written transcript of everything that happens in Parliament. It's a really good way to understand, get a picture of what it is your MP talks about and the way they talk about it, and what kind of, it's interesting to analyse it through the lens of what values are they kind of building on here, and what sort of terms and adjectives are they using that give me a picture of the way of talking that will resonate with them. Actually, one of the things we do at Hope for the Future is help people with research, because it can be time consuming and you can feel like, oh, I don't really know what to look for. So we will put together something called a TLS, which is a tailored lobbying strategy, and it includes an MP's background, so context about the constituency, the things that they're doing, areas of interest, and from that research we then look at that and we're like, okay, what do we think is a sensible thing to engage this MP on? And really what we're doing there is looking for an area of common ground and building on it into something concrete. And we will provide these to you for free, but we do need it to be connected into a particular MP meeting, just so we know that we can schedule our workload. And what you're trying to find out is, with whatever you're trying to talk about with your MP, how does your MP feel about it? Because actually, if you can build a picture of how they feel about it, you can work out a way of framing the corresponding conversation in a way that's going to make sense. And I like to use the analogy of if you're a marathon runner who loves running marathons, and you're talking to a friend who doesn't run at all, because you want to get them engaged with marathon running. Actually, your most effective strategy probably isn't telling them how much you love marathon running, because your non-running friend has no context or interest in that. But if you frame it in terms of maybe like a beginner's running program, and you talk about the benefits to their health, or getting time out, etc., that you're giving them a next step towards getting into something, that's probably more likely to get them to a point of action and starting to run than it is you just enthusing about how much you love marathon running, which is something they don't feel very connected to at all. And so this is what you're doing, is you're assessing your MP's agenda, what they're already involved in, their interests, and you're thinking about what you want to talk to them about. And then you're thinking about, okay, as a starting point, where's my area of overlap? And you might not stay here. We see people start in an area that's common to their MP, but then as they build trust, they can then expand the circle of things that they then talk to an MP about. But definitely initially starting with common ground is important. So here's an example of how you might do that. So if we take the example of Alexander Stafford MP, he's a Conservative MP, and we think about his interests. He's an MP in a former Red Wall area. He's shown concern about local issues like flooding and has championed the local area. And imagine you're a constituent who you want to tackle climate change, you want to challenge government policy, you want to empower your MP to take action, and you want to build community support. And then so you take those two things and you're like, right, how do those things line up? What are the possible angles that I can come at this with that will work and resonate and take things forward in a practical way? And you can see the suggestions of regional investment through the Northern Powerhouse, community energy and flooding. But you can apply this to, you know, whatever it is that you might want to talk about and whoever you're talking to. And if you can just kind of work out what you would bullet point under each heading, and then you can kind of think, okay, how could these intersect? And that's something we can help with as well. And then, so once you've kind of researched, you found some common ground, then you need to think about, okay, what am I wanting from this person when I meet them? And then this takes you into their area of a SMART agenda. So if you've, hopefully by this point, you've kind of worked out how they feel about an issue on this kind of 1 to 5 scale where they are. And then you need to think about, okay, so if they're you know, completely opposed to something, then it's unlikely that the person I'm going to meet is going to want to apply for a debate in Parliament. But they might pass a letter to the relevant minister. And this is what this is about, is showing, okay, actually within Parliament or whichever body it is that you're trying to influence, there'll be different things available as action points to that person. And you need to think about practical ways of getting them involved. I'm not going to go much further into this because of time, but if you are in the position where you're engaging politically, then let us know and we can help with that and talk you through each of the different ways to do this. So finally, you've done that whole process and then you're coming to the conversation itself and you're thinking, okay, how do I have this conversation? And so I'm going to talk through introducing, which was something that was picked up in the discussion, listening, and then concluding. So first of all, introducing your topic. So this is essentially when you go into a meeting, what you want is effectively like a little elevator pitch, like a 30-second thing that says, here's why I'm here. So in this example, I'd like to discuss the issue of air quality in our area. So that's your purpose, it's why you're there. I'm concerned that poor air quality in this area is increasing the risk of COVID-19 and other health issues. So this is your why. Why should the person you're talking to care? It's your hook, it gets them interested. So this would be good in an example where you're talking to an MP and the MP has done quite a lot. On Hansard, everything they're talking about is all health related. So you've got that hook of like, they've gone, oh, this is of interest to me because I really care about health. And then you give them a map, which in this case is, I'd like to discuss your commitment to promoting clean energy and supporting the phase out of petrol and diesel cars. So you're giving them a little bit of a heads up as to where the trajectory of the conversation is going. And actually, I would probably make this a little bit more specific as an example and say, I'd like to talk through this, with a view to asking you whatever it is that you're kind of angling at. Therefore, hopefully the MP is then like, okay, that's where we're going. And then as well, if the conversation goes off track, you can be like, oh, I'm very conscious of time. And we said that we'd talk about these 3 things. And so I'm going to move it on to the next thing. And in our training, we talk about different strategies, keeping a conversation steered so that we avoid that video. Then you kind of move on from your introduction. And the reason we focus on meetings so much at Hope for the Future is that they are such a good avenue for having dialogue that's constructive with an MP. Often when we talk with people about their experiences of political engagement, people will tell us about the campaign emails they've written and not getting a response. And the disappointment and frustration, or they have a response, but it's 3 paragraphs about justifying why something has happened. In a meeting, you can go beyond that and you can get to the point of understanding someone's approach and why they have that particular approach or perspective. So we say, actually, in a meeting, you don't want to talk too much about facts and data, because then it's just a dispute of statistics. It's just going to go back and forward, not very productive. If you need to clarify something, you can do that via email. You don't need to do that in a meeting. What you want to do is dig underneath that. So you want to talk about meaning and impact. So what's the significance of the way things are, you want to create changes? And also, what are the values and attitudes that an MP has? So why do they think one thing is more important than another? Or what's the basis on which they're making decisions? What's the barrier that stops them engaging with different things? And actually, this is a really, the first time that you're meeting someone, actually, you just want to understand who they are better, because if you've got that understanding, then you can further the conversation and you know where to pick up the next time you engage with that person. I'm aware I'm going so quickly through this, and it's just because of time, but we'll get to some Q&A hopefully as well. And then this is the direction of that conversation. So you've done the introduction, you've listened, you've asked questions, you're hopefully understanding them more. And then from that basis of understanding, you can lead to a conclusion that says, okay, so this is what we've established about the situation here. Now, where do we want to go? Where do we want to leave things? How do we want to take this forward? Hopefully you've got not just one ask, but a kind of backup ask, so that as you're presenting it and your MP says, look, that's just not doable. Out of principle, I don't sign early day motions or whatever it is. Then you can be like, oh, right, tell us about why. And then you could be like, oh, right, but you are supportive of, you know, the actual thing we're talking about. What do you think would be realistic? Do you think it would be, for example, and then you propose another ask, and then you kind of get to the point that you want to be. And a really good ask is always, can we meet again? Or can the MP set up a meeting with, you know, someone else that's relevant to the topic that you're talking about? The first step to political engagement is always contacting the person that you want to meet with. So if this is something that you want support with, again, let us know. This is a really good example from someone sending a letter recently. The thing I really like about it is how personal it is. They've added in a photo of the church, which is just a really nice touch. And it means that whoever is reading this, whether it's an MP or the staff member, they're looking at it and they're thinking, oh, how nice. They've like taken the trouble to like put this touch on it. It's not just the text. Oh, they must be really nice to meet with. And that's what you want, is an MP or whoever it is you're meeting to think, oh, I'd love to meet with this group who's clearly taken the time to put this into words. And so this is kind of a trajectory of political engagement from our perspective. It's having a meeting, it's immediately following up saying thank you, checking in with whatever action was agreed to, following up with anything relevant and like starting to build that relationship, and then hopefully having another meeting. And again, the reason you'll have seen in the kind of case studies, we engage in like a few different ways, and it's actually to help an MP gain different reference points for climate change and all the different things associated with that, and building a relationship over time. Think about this from your own personal life. If you meet someone once, you've got a better kind of connection with them and you'll have a bit of an understanding. But actually it's, you know, if you're like, oh yeah, I had a really nice meeting with that person, and then, oh, and I've seen them here, and then we did this. And actually it's that over time repetition that builds and strengthens a relationship and builds trust. And where you have trust, you also have influence, because you can ask things of that person. So that is a big overview. Then finally, opportunities in the year ahead. My work ahead of COP26, well, actually demonstrating broad and mainstream public appetite for action is really important. It's an opportunity to work with local groups and to feed into like a broader action beyond just COP26, and also shaping a national narrative and making sure there's focus on COP26. If you are engaging in COP26 this year and you're like, okay, this has been a lovely overview of like a strategy, but where's the detail on what I'm asking? We have a resource which goes through different ways of talking about COP26 and the different options for engaging. And if you get in touch with me, I'd be more than happy to share that with you and talk you through it. And that's it. We'll have some time for questions and answers. And you can always reach me at this email and I'll be happy to help you with whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Thank you, Rachel. That was really fascinating, actually, and so I'm sure people maybe do have questions to ask of you. And so, if you want to ask a question, please can you put your hand up? Oh, right off the mark, Simon.
Rachel, thank you very much. Really, really informative and really helpful. Two things. One, is it possible to have a copy of the PowerPoint? That's one thing. We've got elections this year, Synod elections for Assembly members. Is there anything particular to know about engaging with candidates rather than with sitting incumbent MPs or Synod members, please?
Yeah, I do have one recommendation here, which maybe isn't the same as what you actually asked, but we've had good experience of doing hustings with potential candidates, and particularly holding a hustings that's all around climate and environment. It's a really good way to signal just the fact that you're holding it, that's an area that you're particularly interested in, and it makes all those candidates go and prepare on climate and environment ahead of being elected. So yeah, if you want to arrange that and need our help, get in touch. We've done quite a few of those now. And the other thing to say is that there's an organisation called The Commitment. I don't know if I should know this, but I don't know whether they do this for different levels of elections. But ahead of elections, they try and get a tally of the number of constituents or people who can vote within an election to say and commit, that's why it's called The Commitment, that actually it's the strength of policies in a particular area, in this case climate and environment, that will dictate your vote. And then once you've kind of tallied that, you then present that to the candidates and say, look, that you've got this proportion, amount of us, this proportion, who are determining their vote based on your policies on this area. And actually that's a really good way to, you know, if candidates belong to parties that don't have those policies, then they'll be going back and saying, hold on, this is becoming a big issue within this election, and we need to, you know, have a bit of a better plan for engagement.
Rachel, has The Commitment got a website?
Yes, it does. And in fact, I'll try and find it now while we're talking and put it in the chat.
Has anybody else got any questions to Rachel? Joe?
It's not necessarily a question. So I am the URC Youth Assembly Moderator-elect, and this year we're creating content for various different months on various different social justice issues. For example, this current month is focusing on Israel and Palestine, and we've looked at activism and various other things. In September, we're looking at environment. So it was just more of a heads up that I'll probably be contacting you to work more closely and to see kind of what stuff we'll be doing. We're looking to do a lot of focusing on COP and trying to, see what we can do with that, educating some young people throughout the URC. But yeah, and it was also just like, so that was out there. And then we can maybe see what we were going to do, but yeah, I thought I'd mention that now.
Yeah, that would be great. The other thing, as a plug for something else that I'm doing, which I realise is, I'm here in one capacity and I'm talking in another. I'm part of Young Christian Climate Network, and we're organising a relay between the G7 and COP26. And there are 2 Welsh branches of that route, and the full sign up comes out on the 5th of April, but we'll be looking for walkers and a whole other range of volunteer roles to help with that. and it's campaigning around climate finance, and we've got Christian Aid is supporting us with that, and we'd love people to get involved.
Thanks, Rachel. That's really interesting and useful for URC youth to be involved in that. I know they're partners with it. So, anybody else got any questions? Eileen.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Rachel. I've had, well, my MP is actually incredibly supportive of all matters around, you know, climate change and so on. But she can be, because she's very busy, she can be difficult to pin down. And I know you showed us that letter of, you know, with the church at the top, which is nice. But what do you do if you actually really can't get any response for your MP?
Yeah, it's a matter of escalating chases, usually. So we say, as a rule of thumb, you send something, wait 3 weeks, get in touch and send a follow-up email. Straight away, just use the text from your first email to save. Sometimes, often, if you don't do that, you'll just get a response back being like, oh, we don't have whatever it is you sent, please can you send it again? So if you just send it again the first time as part of your follow-up, that makes sense. And then if you're really not getting a response, phone the office and reach someone and say, look, we're really keen to meet, we've sent this through, I'm happy to send it again. If I send it again, can you just monitor the inbox while I send it to you? And usually at that point, when you've kind of made personal contact with them, that's a good signal to the staff member who's taking that. They're like, okay, I better make sure that we do actually respond to this properly, because they're clearly, you know, really do want to meet. We have resorted on a couple of occasions to using social media on behalf of different constituents around the country who are trying to get hold of MPs that have gone AWOL, and usually that does work at some point. But yeah, I do understand the frustration.
I think it's a perennial problem. I certainly can never speak to my MP. I always end up speaking to the staff member. Mark Pickering.
It's thanks for your presentation, Rachel. It was insightful, and the sort of approach is rigorous and helpful as well. We've got 3 levels of government, really. There's the parish council, there's the district council, and then there's the county council. Now, as much as they might try to work harmoniously, you get tensions between the different groups. And I wondered what your advice is in terms of figuring out the way of who to approach with what first.
That's really hard when you don't know the dynamics of who you're approaching. So I don't have an obvious way around that. Sometimes if you hit a dead end where you seem to be going, if you're going in circles between different places and you just keep getting handed on, trying to set up some sort of meeting with all of those people so that you can identify actually where the decision is really good. And if you're speaking to the person who's meant to be, you know, answering you or doing something, and you're not getting an answer from them, and they say it's not in their power, then usually saying something like, oh, would you be able to email introduce me to the person whose power this actually is usually a good way to work out if it isn't in their power, or if you won't want to do that if it acts in their role, so then hopefully it kickstarts it a bit. But sorry, that's not really specific advice on exactly the question you've asked.
No, it was a specific question, but it's a helpful answer. It's really finding the ways to get them to work together. So that it will pass all the way through all 3 levels. Really, that's great. Thank you.
It's hard because the sizes of councils and the levels of them vary so much, and there aren't any. Sometimes trying to find the information it's not standardized, so there's no one place to look.
Thank you.
Jo, you've got another question.
Yeah, it was mainly kind of looking, so is it still worth contacting your local MP even if your political views and opinions don't line up? So for example, my local MP is Labour, however I'm personally a Liberal Democrat, and I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats. So would it be better to contact my local Lib Dem MP or my local Labour MP, as it's like the MP of the constituency in which I live?
So you're likely to have an easier start with a person whose political affiliation aligns with yours, because the way you'll speak about something naturally, like you've got some of that common ground just automatically. But for the person whose political affiliation is different to yours, you're actually more interesting for them to meet because they want to win you over. Whereas if they're they're meeting with someone who completely agrees with them, it's almost like, well, I've got their vote, so what? Whereas they might be more interested to engage with you and groups that you belong to that are actually of a slightly different audience or political affiliation. So I would say go for both.
Okay. Well, I think if there's no other questions. Oh, Eileen, you've got another question.
Sorry, Judy, I was just going to ask Rachel, I sort of read in your literature that that it was quite probable that a lot of MPs didn't really know the importance of COP26. And I just wondered if that had changed at all, or how you sort of figured, that sort of situation was going.
Yeah, it's starting to change, and it's starting to change partly because Alok Sharma is now only the COP26 president, and it feels like there's been a bit of awakening across government of like, oh, this is coming up and we should do something about it, which is positive. Whether MPs actually know the ins or outs of it, I think is much more suspect. We're still having meetings where MPs don't know quite common terms related to COP26. So I'd say an example of that is NDC, which is nationally determined contribution. And I reckon if you polled MPs and said, what does this stand for? And does the UK have one and what is it? You'd find quite a high majority didn't know what the numbers were or what it stood for. And actually that's quite an integral part of the COP process. So that is still concerning.
Thank you. Oh, Simon, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, Judy. I was just going to ask other people here about whether they think the Synod should be encouraging people to be engaged politically more with their MPs. Is it something that we've obviously doing this, but is it something that we should encourage other churches more to do? You've obviously come tonight because you're interested, but do you think it's something that everyone should be interested in?
Thanks for the evening so far, Rachel. I'm being asked to do a bit about craftivism, and I'm going to share my screen and do a kind of brief rundown on what craftivism is and what you can do in relation to craftivism. And then I'd love to hear some of your ideas or things that you maybe have done in your own situation. So I'm just going to share my screen. So, craftivism, you might ask. It's hard to say it without a good set of teeth. But craftivism is the art of gentle protest, and it's a practice which engages creativity in engaging also with political and social causes. So when we're thinking about craftivism, I'm hoping my screen is going to share properly. There we are. We have to think about a whole range of different things. But tonight we're thinking particularly about green issues. But craftivism is engaging politically through activities such as knitting, crocheting, sewing, just creating, whatever it may be. But it's for a specific reason. It's to enter into the arena of activism The term craftivism emerged in 2003 and by a woman in America called Betsy Greer. And it was taken up more recently in the UK by Sarah Corbett, who's the founder of the Craftivist Collective. I've put that link into the chat for anybody that's interested in that. And she promoted the idea that people could use their creativity to improve the world in a really gentle way. She encourages people to take time when they're creating their craft. So even the mechanism of splitting threads or threading your needle, cutting, arranging, that mindfulness that comes in those activities, giving us time and space to reflect on the issue that you're considering at the time. And so craftivism allows people who want their voices to be heard and their opinions to be sought, and to support the causes that they're really passionate about, a chance to do that, but without all the chanting and the banner waving, just at their own pace and in their own way. This year, the BBC did a programme, and Jenny Eclair was asked to go and explore what craftivism was. And she met amazing people doing incredible things. And it wasn't just fabric, it was all sorts of things that people she met, who felt that their craft was a way to change hearts and minds. And so she heard stories from craftivists around the UK. She visited a place in Wiltshire who sent miniature knickers all around their community to highlight the importance of screening for cervical cancer. And she also learned about how graffiti sent a well-being message in a London park. There's a picture of her with the woman who created the art on a plinth. And she also looked at Liverpool's football club's memorial quilt, remembering those who lost their lives. She looked at initiatives that they had in common, and through their painstaking and thoughtful and beautiful way, got their point heard. One of the things that people certainly around the eco-church sort of community would know about the Show the Love campaign. And this is a really good example of craftivism in action. The Green Hearts, you can see one behind me, but the Green Hearts, which were emerged through the Show the Love campaign, is a celebration that it shows the impact of the climate crisis, and that people across the world, through the power of their Green Hearts, are making a statement about that. The Show the Love is done in all sorts of ways. You can see the variety of different crafts that have been used to create those Green Hearts. But there are not just the Show the Love campaigns, there's lots of other ones as well. There's one called the Fashion Revolution. And Fashion Revolution came into being after a factory in Bangladesh in 2013, the Rana Plaza factory collapsed, and it mobilized activists to say this is wrong. These factories where clothing is made in poor conditions for pennies and sold for pounds has to stop. So the fashion industry is challenged by the fashion revolution, and these images are taken from one craftivist movement who have made a banner, and they've made fabric post-it notes where they have stitched their statements and their feelings about the injustice in the clothing industry. Another kind of craftivism which has emerged over the years is also the World Wildlife Fund. They have engaged in origami, and this year the World Wildlife Fund in Spain have encouraged people to make origami birds, and it's called origami migration, and it's to reflect the Spanish government's decision to remove the wetlands in a significant country park or national park in Spain. And this is a vital stopping off point for migratory birds. So by destroying that habitat, it would actually create chaos in the bird community by not providing them with a stopping off point between their journey to Africa in the migration period. But they've also done campaigns similarly around elephants and their habitat, but also several other endangered species whose habitats are affected or they're affected by poaching. And some of our churches also have turned to craftivism, and they've turned to craftivism in a really specific way. This is an image from Beulah URC, where they turned to craftivism to state their stance on divesting from fossil fuels. So that decision, then it says to their community, this is where we stand as a church. And so it's maybe not about making the political point, but it's actually saying to people, this is our stand in this part of the community. So activism comes in many forms, and craftivism also comes in many different forms. And it's a way of deeply considering an issue while creating something beautiful to make a point. And it can be done through any form of craft, as I said. And it can be done in a very considered way, where you're really considering what it is you feel about this issue and how it could make a difference. So my challenge for you tonight is be an activist, be a craftivist. I don't know if there's any questions around that. As I say, it was a brief kind of rundown about what craftivism is and how it can actually make a big difference. But I'm sure lots of you have already engaged in it in a slight way. No questions. That's fine. Has anybody engaged in craftivism, and what was it that you did? I know that some of the political campaigns had, especially during Brexit, there was political campaigns about hankies and stitching notes to your MPs. Janet Nelson.
I don't know if this counts, but I recently bought a glass kiln to do fused glass. So for Easter Day, I've got a white painted tree made out of a pallet, and if the weather is okay, it's going to go outside in my garden with the glass eggs hanging on it. On a Good Friday, we'll have a purple piece of material and a crown of thorns in it, and then I'll change it on Sunday morning. If the weather's not good, it'll have to go inside in the window. But I don't know, is that craftivism?
Craftivism more would make a political point along with your craft. Okay. So, for example, as I said about the hankies, that a lot of MPs were given hankies that had a little embroidered phrase on it that said, don't blow it. just before they went in to vote for Brexit. So lots of people did that. The Show You Love campaign, again, is another example of craftivism. And, you know, there's some people wear hearts in their sleeves, and there's a campaign around that. So that would be more, it's more thinking about the specific point that you're trying to make, but doing it in a craft way.
Well, my specific point is Easter Day. So
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I mean that's a good.
It's not political, is it? You know,
it's not political.
No, okay.
Well, I think it's craft evangelism, but also it's a new movement. We're just starting it tonight. But also, if proclaiming Jesus is Lord is a political statement, then what Janet's doing is political.
Yeah. You're true. It's true. Joe.
So I've participated in craftivism quite a few times, and one of my favourite times was I was at Greenbelt, which is a Christian activism festival thing. It's great fun, and I went into a tent which was all around various campaigns supporting women, talking about like cervical and ovarian cancer and breast cancer, and women's issues and world issues surrounding women. And one of their crafts was creating knitted and crocheted boobs to go on to bunting, and it was talking about supporting women who had been through breast cancer and had to have a mastectomy, or were learning to accept their new bodies when they've had changes to their bodies through various things, pregnancy, whatever that might be. And I think that's a really clever way of actually talking about that and creating different sizes and shapes and colors to promote that and to actually normalize, you know, using these things.
And there was quite a prominent campaign during President Trump's, just after President Trump's inauguration, where a lot of women were wearing pink hats called pussy hats, and that was to kind of highlight some of the comments that he had made during his political campaign. And you know, that sort of it was aligning with a lot of the Me Too movement and things as well. So there are lots of different ways, and sometimes they get more in the public domain than others. But I think certainly the Show the Love campaign is something that people have catched on to and are talking about more and more, and you see more and more green hearts around in various forms. Eileen.
Yeah, I think an important part of that is not just actually sort of having the green hearts around in the sort of public spaces, but actually people were encouraged to actually make a little green heart and enclose it in a postcard to their MP. So it was like that's a conversation starter in itself, and also something that's eye-catching. So it's sort of got lots of different facets to it, which are really useful.
Yeah. Anne. You need to unmute.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. I do think we need to remember that we are an organisation of faith as well as an organisation about making a political difference, and I think that's something that we tend to perhaps or are forgetting at times.
Yes, that's a good point. I think that sometimes they go in hand, and I think it's finding a way of marrying the two together, and maybe through banners that the church are creating to say this is our stance on divesting on fossil fuels, or making a stance about, you know, care of creation and that whole kind of aspect of creation activism, I would say, is valid. But yeah, I think you're right. We have to kind of maybe pick our things that we choose to activate about. Catherine.
You will remember Jubilee 2000 when we made loads of, I mean, the chains that were made, that was all part of it. Do you remember, were you there when we
had the chain man?
We did have the chain man on the stage at Park. That was the Christian Aid one, but we also festooned the town hall with chains and got people to really think in those ways. And there were other different chain things that went on, but that was part of it. And it did, I mean, it was about linking faith and the life of the world, which is all politics is. But yeah, lot of it went on then. That I don't think it's been quite such. Maybe COP26 will do it, but there hasn't been, I don't think, quite such an all-encompassing thing that really engaged everybody in the way that Jubilee 2000 did then.
Yeah, I agree. Mark.
I haven't got a question. I haven't got a question, but I just wanted to thank you both because it'll save me tweeting you later. Just to say that as somebody who makes short films, usually in the name of the Lord these days, you've given me a lot of food for thought. So it's been very useful this evening. So thank you very much, because I may become an activist.
Joe, have you just got your hand up or you got a question?
Yeah, no, it wasn't necessarily a question. It was just another URC youth plug. So last December, we've been working quite closely with the Methodist Church and JPIT, which you might have heard of. And they are working on a campaign at the moment called Reset the Debt, which is focusing on families who have accrued quite a lot of debt and asking the UK to pay off that debt. Whether for lots of different reasons, for whether it be your electricity bill or your gas bill, to help those families get out of that debt. And one of the campaigns that we're kind of in the process of working on is something called the Gingerbread Campaign. So it's asking children and young people to decorate, bake, colour gingerbread and post them with a letter to their MPs talking about this Reset the Debt, because we're talking about using these people, and children are so aware of debt and so aware of things that are happening within their families as much as their parents might not realise that, and saying actually we need to come together as one. And as much as this has been a terrible year for everybody, and asking the government to recognise that this is something that we're really strongly about, and kind of asking local churches to really promote this and to promote the Reset the Debt campaign. Again, there's lots of information about that I can send to you. But yeah, it's really great. And it's really great to see you all being really enthused about this, which is fantastic.
Thanks. Another example of a different kind of activism, baking. And what MP would sort of refuse a gingerbread person through the post? Might get a bit crushed. But,
I'd like to say that just going back to Rachel's presentation, if any churches are anybody's thinking about following through with their MPs, Rachel does. The support from Hope for the Future is absolutely amazing, and they'll send you out draft emails and just incredible research around your MP. So it does make it very, very, very easy procedure, and that churches have an incredibly powerful voice in this year, and it is something that I'm sure is an important thing to do.
Thanks to Rachel and to Judy for tonight, and thank you all for coming and participating. Interesting, the reflection that I've put together addresses in some ways what Anne was talking about earlier, and about our motivation. Why bother? Why should I bother? If I stop buying a couple of plastic bags a week, what difference is that going to make? If I start turning everything off, what difference is that going to make? If I write to my MP, AM or PM, what difference is that going to make? Well, first of all, if we all did it, there would be a difference. We've seen that in lockdown. And second, if we all do not do it, there will certainly be a difference. However, the difference is that one difference is a positive difference and the other difference is a negative difference. And that's the difference. But let us think about our motivations for caring for this beautiful planet, which is our responsibility for a while. Of course, we want to look after it, so that it's a nice place to live, for us and for future generations. Of course, we might think that this time is the first time that people have ever cared for creation. But actually, it is probably the reverse that is true. Our time has been the era when people couldn't care less about the environment. That's why we're in such a mess. That's why some of us are getting alarmed and want to take action. But there is another reason for wanting to care for the whole of creation. And it's not something new, it's not from the 21st century. But rather, let us hear the words of John Calvin. Yes, I said John Calvin, he of 1509 to 1564. He wrote of this beautiful creation that it is the theatre of God's glory. Ponder that for a moment. Creation is the theatre of God's glory. It is the place where the glory of God is shown, is revealed, is played out. In every blooming daffodil, in every blackbird's song, in every wave on the shore, in every fish in the sea, in every bee that buzzes, in every horse that neighs, in every river that flows, in every tree that grows, the glory of God is acted out in this amazing theatre. John Calvin didn't come up with this idea on his own. As we know, he depended on the scriptures for his reasoning and read it just there where we can in Romans chapter 1, where Paul wrote, "For what can be known about God is plain, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made." And of course, around about a millennia before that, the psalmist wrote, "The heavens declare the glory of God." So then, it stands to reason that if we harm and destroy creation, we make a personal attack on the glory of God. We claim to be wise, but we are fools. If we care not for all that God has made, then we care not about the glory of God. Is it not the purpose of human beings to glorify God and enjoy him forever? Is this not motivation enough for Christians to witness to this glory by caring for the theatre in which the show takes place? Why bother? Why should you and I bother? Well, because God looked at it and said, "It is good." Who are you and I that we could destroy the goodness of God? Who are you and I that we would damage the revelation of God's glory? Let us go out into God's theatre and applaud every member of the cast, every character in the show. Let us go out with joy and see the trees clapping their hands, proclaiming the glory of God. The Lord our God, who created all things, by whose will they are created and have their being, to him who alone is worthy to receive them, be glory and honour and power. Amen.